A night of luxury ends in chaos when an explosion destroys a millionaire's mansion during his own party. Amidst the smoke, screams, and rubble, a child disappears, and no one seems willing to face it. The only one to run into the flames is the one everyone ignored, the silent employee who carries a burned past. But in saving the girl, she ignites something greater and exposes a dark plan that was never meant to come to light. Saturday night in New York carried that typical humid heat of July, when summer seems to embrace the entire city with its warm, suffocating arms. In the Upper East Side neighborhood, one of the most exclusive areas of Manhattan, the mansion of Edward Miller shone like a beacon of luxury and ostentation. Golden lights illuminated every corner of the imposing mansion, reflecting off the huge window panes and the crystals of the chandeliers that hung from the soaring ceilings. It was the most anticipated engagement party of the year, an event that brought together business magnates, artists, digital influencers, and the entire New York elite, who made a point of being seen in the right places. Marina Shore adjusted her navy blue uniform for the third time in an hour. Her hands, calloused from so much work, trembled slightly as she arranged the crystal glasses on the silver tray. She had been working as a staff member in this house for only 3 months, hired by a domestic services agency that provided labor for events and special occasions. At 38, Marina carried an old sadness in her eyes, the kind that time cannot completely erase. Her brown hair was pulled, back in a tight bun, and she avoided making eye contact with the guests, always maintaining the discreet and silent posture expected of her. The mansion was filled with beautiful, perfumed people, dressed in clothes that cost more than Marina earned in an entire year. About 200 people circulated through the main hall, decorated with immense floral arrangements of white roses and rare orchids. Electronic music pulsed from the speakers built into the walls, and the DJ, specially hired for the occasion, kept the dance floor constantly moving. Waiters dressed in black served sophisticated canapés and French champagne, while professional photographers captured every moment, every smile, every hug staged for social media. At the center of all this celebration was Valentina Monroe, the fiancée. She was 29 years old, but she looked much younger. Her white dress, custom-made by a renowned designer, hugged her slender body like a second skin. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her tanned shoulders, and the smile she showed the cameras was flawless, studied, rehearsed. Valentina was a digital influencer, with over 3 million followers on social media. Her entire life was a carefully produced spectacle. Every photo, every video, every word was calculated to generate engagement, likes, comments, and above all, money. Edward Miller, the fiancé, watched Valentina with adoring eyes. He was 45 years old, with graying hair at his temples and the posture of a man accustomed to being in command. A real estate mogul, Edward had built a billion-dollar empire over 20 years of hard work. His developments were spread throughout New York City, from commercial buildings on Fifth Avenue to luxury condominiums in Soho. A widower for 5 years, he had tried to rebuild his emotional life without much success, until he met Valentina at a charity event 6 months ago. The enchantment was immediate, overwhelming. She was everything he was looking for, young, beautiful, full of life. Or at least, that's what he thought he saw. Sophia, Edward's daughter, was only 7 years old, a girl with curly hair and brown eyes that shone with the innocence of childhood. She ran through the mansion's garden, playing with other children of the guests, oblivious to the complexity of the adult world that surrounded them. Sophia wore a light pink dress, and her crystal-clear laughter echoed among the towering palm trees that decorated the garden. Every now and then she would stop to watch her future stepmother, trying to understand why that beautiful woman always seemed to be looking at a camera, even when there wasn't one around. Marina, while serving champagne to a group of businessmen discussing investments and the financial market, couldn't help but watch Valentina. There was something about her that deeply bothered Marina, a feeling she couldn't name. Perhaps it was the way Valentina looked at Edward, with a gleam that seemed more calculating than loving. Or perhaps it was the way she treated Sophia, always with exaggerated affection when cameras were around, but with an almost imperceptible coldness in moments when she thought no one was looking. Marina knew that kind of falsehood well. For years, She had worked in different houses, serving wealthy families, witnessing dramas, betrayals, and lies hidden behind perfect smiles. But there was something different that night, something that made her instincts scream for attention. It was as if the air was charged with an invisible tension, a storm about to break over everyone there. Near Valentina, always a few steps away, was Richard Taylor. He introduced himself as the fiancé's personal assistant, but Marina had noticed that his role went far beyond that. Richard was 35, with black hair slicked back, an impeccable grey suit, and a silver watch on his wrist that reflected the party lights. His dark eyes always seemed to be calculating something, assessing people and situations with the precision of someone accustomed to planning every move. He was constantly on the phone, always in a low tone, always stepping away to more private corners of the mansion. Marina served another round of drinks and headed to the kitchen to get new trays. The kitchen was enormous, fully equipped with state-of-the-art appliances, marble countertops, and a central island where the catering team prepared the dishes to be served throughout the night. The smell of fine food mingled with the aroma of imported perfumes that drifted in and out of the room as the waiters circulated. It was then that Marina smelled it for the first time. A different smell, one that shouldn't be there. It was a strong chemical odor that cut through all the other aromas. She frowned, trying to identify the source. It wasn't a cleaning product, nor was it any of the kitchen ingredients. It was something industrial, artificial, that made her eyes burn slightly. Marina cautiously followed the smell, leaving the kitchen and crossing the hallway that led to the east wing of the mansion, a less crowded area where the guest rooms and Edward's office were located. The party music grew more distant with each step, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. The hallway was dimly lit, illuminated only by small lights embedded in the baseboards. That's when she heard it, a sharp, metallic click coming from one of the closed rooms. Marina stopped, her heart racing. Her instinct told her to get out of there, to go back to the safety of the crowded hall. But something stronger compelled her to investigate. She approached the slightly ajar door and peeked through the gap. The room was empty, but Marina could see an open metal briefcase on the coffee table. Inside, there was something she couldn't fully identify, but it seemed out of place in that luxurious environment. There were wires, small electronic devices, something that definitely did not belong at an engagement party. Before she could get a better look, she heard footsteps approaching down the hall. Marina quickly moved away from the door and pretended to be adjusting one of the flower vases that decorated the hallway. A man passed her without a glance, walking briskly toward the room. It was Richard. He went inside, closed the door behind him, and Marina heard the sound of a lock turning. Her heart pounded. Something was wrong, very wrong. Marina returned to the main hall, trying to maintain her composure, but her mind was working furiously. Should she tell someone? But tell them what, exactly? That she had seen a strange briefcase? That she had smelled a chemical odor? Who would believe her, a simple temporary employee against the assistant of a famous influencer? Back in the hall, the party was still in full swing. Valentina was in the center of the dance floor, twirling in Edward's arms as the guests applauded and took pictures. She smiled in all directions, waved, blew kisses. She was the perfect fiancée, the woman who had won the heart of one of New York's richest men. But Marina, looking at her at that moment, could only see a mask. A very well-constructed mask, but a mask nonetheless. Sophia ran to her father, asking to dance with him. Edward lifted the little girl into his arms, spinning her in the air as she laughed loudly. Valentina smiled at the scene, but Marina noticed that the smile didn't reach her eyes. For a brief instant, Valentina's expression revealed something different, something cold and calculating, before the mask slipped back into place. The hours passed. Midnight was approaching, and the party was beginning to reach its peak. Edward asked for silence and stepped onto the small stage set up in the corner of the hall. He held a glass of champagne and had the wide smile of someone fulfilling a dream. Valentina stood by his side, her delicate hand resting on his arm, the perfect posture of a loving fiancé. Edward began to speak, thanking everyone for coming, saying how happy he was to have found love again after difficult years. His voice cracked when he mentioned his late wife, Sophia's mother, and how he never imagined he could feel whole again. Valentina squeezed his hand, looking at him with an expression that could fool anyone, except Marina. Marina was leaning against the back wall of the hall, watching everything attentively. It was then that she saw Richard again. He was near the door leading to the east wing, the same hallway where she had smelled the chemical odor. Richard looked at Valentina, and the two exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. It was a look of understanding, of complicity, and then Richard disappeared down the hallway. Edward's speech continued. He talked about the future, about the plans he had with Valentina, about how he wanted Sophia to grow up in a home full of love. The guests listened emotionally, some wiping away tears, others raising their glasses in constant toasts. Valentina maintained her perfect smile, waving to the photographers who never stopped capturing every second of that moment. Marina felt a chill run down her spine. The chemical smell was stronger now, invading the hall despite all the ventilation. She looked around, trying to see if anyone else had noticed, but everyone seemed focused on Edward's speech. It was then that she heard it, very faintly, almost muffled by the music and voices, a sound that made her blood run cold, an electronic hum, continuous, coming from the direction of the east wing. Marina dropped her tray on a side table and started walking toward the hallway. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Each step seemed to last an eternity. The music from the hall began to sound distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. The humming grew louder, more insistent. She had to warn someone. She had to scream, get attention, do something. Marina opened her mouth to speak, but at that exact moment, Edward raised his glass and all the guests did the same, shouting a deafening toast in unison. The music came back even louder, the dance floor filled up again, and any chance of Marina being heard disappeared in the middle of that sea of celebration. She kept walking toward the hallway, faster and faster. The electronic hum was so loud now that she didn't understand how no one else could hear it. Or maybe they could, but they were all too distracted, too drunk, too happy to pay attention. Marina reached the entrance to the east wing. The door leading to the inner rooms was ajar, and a faint light was blinking inside. The chemical smell was almost unbearable now. She put her hand on the doorknob, about to push the door open completely, when she heard footsteps behind her. It was Richard. He stared at her with cold, calculating eyes. The artificial kindness he displayed in public was gone. It was the look of someone who had been discovered and knew it. Marina took a step back, fear beginning to take over her body. Richard advanced toward her, but before he could reach her, a child's voice echoed down the hall. It was Sophia. The little girl had come looking for her father and had gotten lost in the mansion. She appeared running, her pink dress swaying, and stopped when she saw Marina and Richard standing face to face. Richard looked at the girl, then at Marina, and then he backed away. He smiled, that fake professional smile, and said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "Don't meddle where you're not wanted." And then he turned and disappeared in the opposite direction, leaving Marina and Sophia alone in the hallway. The girl looked at Marina with her big, curious eyes. "Are you okay? Why are you here alone?" Sophia asked, with the innocence of someone who had no idea of the danger hanging over that house. Marina forced a smile, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "I'm fine, sweetie. Shall we go back to the party?" But before they could move, the world exploded. The sound was deafening, a roar that seemed to come from the bowels of the earth. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and Marina felt her body thrown backward by the force of the shockwave. She tried to protect Sophia, pulling the girl into her arms as she fell. The ceiling began to collapse, pieces of concrete and wood falling like deadly rain. The lights flickered once, twice, 3 times, before going out completely. In the main hall, chaos erupted instantly. The immense chandelier hanging from the ceiling plummeted onto the dance floor, shattering into 1,000 crystal fragments that flew in every direction. People screamed, ran, tripped over each other in a desperate attempt to find an exit. The music had stopped, replaced by the shrill, useless blare of fire alarms that no one could hear over the widespread panic. Walls cracked, windows exploded, and fire began to spread rapidly through the curtains and carpets. Black, dense smoke invaded every corner of the mansion, making it almost impossible to see anything. Edward screamed Sophia's name, his voice hoarse with desperation, but he couldn't move. Trapped under debris near the stage, where moments before he had given his speech of love and hope. Valentina was near the main exit, being supported by some guests who were trying to help her leave. Tears streamed down her face, smudging her perfect makeup. But Marina, even from a distance, even amidst the chaos, noticed something strange. Valentina's eyes did not reflect real despair. They reflected something very different. Perhaps calculation. Perhaps even a hint of satisfaction. Marina was on the floor of the East Wing hallway, covered in dust and debris. Her body ached all over, but she was alive. And more importantly, Sophia was alive too. The girl was crying softly, clinging to Marina's neck, as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was collapsing around them. A heavy beam had fallen just a few feet away, creating a sort of temporary shelter that protected them from the larger debris that continued to fall. Marina tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through her left leg. She looked down and saw that a heavy piece of wood was pinning her ankle. She tried to pull but couldn't. The smoke was getting thicker, entering her lungs, making her cough violently. "Auntie, I'm scared," Sophia cried, her voice small and frightened. Marina hugged the girl against her chest, trying to convey a sense of security she didn't feel herself. "It's going to be okay, sweetie. I promise, it's going to be okay." But as she said those words, as she heard the screams of despair coming from the hall, as she felt the heat of the approaching fire, Marina didn't know if she could keep that promise. She didn't know if they would get out of there alive. And somewhere in that ruined mansion, between the smoke and the fire, Richard watched everything from a safe vantage point. The silver watch on his wrist showing exactly 12:15. The exact moment the device had been programmed to detonate. The exact moment a carefully orchestrated plan came to fruition. And the exact moment innocent lives were put at risk for pure greed and ambition. The night that began under crystals and promises now burned under ashes and lies. And only the dawn would reveal who would emerge alive from that inferno, and who would carry the scars of that tragedy forever. The silence that followed the first few seconds of the explosion was even more terrifying than the blast itself. It was a heavy silence, thick with dust and smoke, where the screams seemed muffled, as if the entire world had been placed inside a glass dome. Marina remained motionless for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Her ears were ringing, and she had a metallic taste in her mouth. The smell of burning invaded her nostrils, mixed with the chemical odor she had smelled minutes before the tragedy. Sophia was crying softly against her chest, her small fingers clutching tightly to Marina's. Blue uniform. The girl was trembling all over, and Marina could feel the child's racing heart beating against her own. She had to move. She had to get Sophia out of there before the fire spread completely, or more debris collapsed on them. Marina tried again to free her leg trapped under the heavy wood. The pain was intense, sharp, but she knew she couldn't give in to it. Not now. Not when an innocent life depended on her. She placed her hands on the debris-covered floor, ignoring the cuts the glass shards made on her palms, and pushed. With all the strength she could muster. The wood moved a few inches, just enough for her to pull her ankle out. "Sophia, honey, I need you to be very brave now, okay?" Marina said in the firmest voice she could manage, holding the girl's face in her hands. "We're going to get out of here together, but you need to do exactly what I say. Can you do that for me?" The girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but with a surprising determination for someone so small. Marina picked Sophia up and began to crawl down the hallway, toward what she hoped was an exit. The smoke was getting thicker, and she had to tear off a piece of her own uniform to cover the girl's nose and mouth, trying to filter at least some of that toxic smoke. The East Wing was unrecognizable. Walls had collapsed, creating obstacles that forced Marina to make constant detours. Electrical wires dangled from the damaged ceiling, sparking dangerously. The heat was increasing with every second, and Marina knew the fire was getting closer. She could hear it, a sinister crackling that mixed with the groans of the house's structure giving way. As she moved forward, Marina had a sudden flashback. She was back on that night 5 years ago, when everything in her life changed forever. Another fire, another child. But that time, she hadn't made it in time. That time, she had lost everything. The pain of that memory was as intense as the physical pain she felt now, but it served to push her forward. This time would be different. This time, she would save Sophia. She had to. "Auntie Marina, I heard my daddy screaming," Sophia said between sobs. "Is he okay? Is he going to be okay?" Marina didn't know what to answer. She had no idea where Edward was or what condition he was in, but she couldn't let Sophia lose hope. "Your daddy is strong, Sophia. I'm sure he's looking for you too, and when we get out of here, you'll find each other. I promise." Another promise she didn't know if she could keep, but sometimes promises were all that was left to keep someone alive. Finally, Marina glimpsed a sliver of light ahead. It seemed to be coming from the garden area, perhaps one of the glass doors that led outside. She quickened. Her pace, or what passed for a pace given, she was practically crawling, and prayed that the exit wasn't blocked. As they got closer, Marina saw that the door was partially obstructed by debris, but there was enough space to get through. With superhuman effort, she pushed some of the smaller pieces of rubble aside, creating a passage. The fresh night air of New York had never felt so precious. Marina practically threw herself outside, still holding Sophia, and they rolled together onto the garden lawn. For a moment, Marina just lay there, breathing deeply, trying to clear her lungs of the smoke she had inhaled. Sophia was coughing violently beside her, but she was alive. They were alive. Marina looked back and saw the mansion in flames. The fire was rapidly consuming the structure, and orange flames leaped from the broken windows, reaching for the night sky like accusing fingers. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Someone must have called the fire department. Marina forced herself to stand, despite the searing pain in her leg, and carried Sophia away from the house, putting as much distance as possible between them and the inferno the mansion had become. At the front of the property, the chaos was total. Dozens of people had managed to get out and were now crowded on the street, some injured, others in shock, all trying to understand what had happened. Ambulances began to arrive, paramedics rushing to treat the most seriously injured. Firefighters disembarked from their trucks, unrolling hoses and organizing themselves to fight the blaze. Marina scanned the crowd for Edward, but couldn't find him. Her heart tightened at the thought that he might still be trapped inside. She handed Sophia over to a paramedic who immediately began to examine the girl and then turned to go back toward the house. "Mom, you can't go back in there." A firefighter tried to stop her, but Marina broke free. "There are people trapped inside. The owner of the house, he was in the main hall when it all exploded." The firefighter hesitated, looking at the burning mansion and then back at Marina. He saw the determination in her eyes, saw the burn marks on her arms, saw the blood staining her torn uniform, and he understood that this woman was not going to give up. "I'll go with you," he said finally. "But you, follow my lead, understood?" Marina nodded, and together they advanced back into the inferno. The main entrance was completely blocked, but they found a side entrance they could try. The heat was unbearable, and Marina felt the skin on her face burn from the proximity of the flames. The firefighter went ahead, using an axe to clear a path through the debris. They shouted, calling for survivors, but it was hard to hear any response over the roar of the fire and the collapsing structure. It was Marina who heard it first, a low groan coming from under a pile of rubble near what had once been the stage. She ran over, starting to remove pieces of wood and plaster with her bare hands. The firefighter joined her, and together they managed to create an opening. It was Edward. He was conscious, but trapped from the waist down under a heavy beam. His face was covered in dust and blood, and he was coughing violently. When his eyes met Marina's, there was a flicker of recognition. "Sophia," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "My daughter. Where is my daughter?" "She's safe," Marina answered quickly. "I got her out. She's with the paramedics outside. She's fine." The relief that crossed Edward's face was palpable, and tears left clean streaks on his dirty cheeks. "Thank you, thank you." The firefighter quickly assessed the situation. "I'm going to need heavier equipment to move this beam. I'll call for backup. You," he looked at Marina, Stay with him. Don't let him lose consciousness. Talk to him. Keep him awake." And then the firefighter ran off, leaving Marina and Edward alone amidst the ever-approaching flames. Marina knelt beside Edward, holding his hand. His hands were cold, despite the surrounding heat, a worrying sign. "Stay." "With me, Mr. Miller," Marina said firmly. "Your daughter is waiting for you outside. She needs her father. So you're going to fight. You're going to stay awake, and you're going to get out of here. Understood?" Edward nodded weakly. "You saved my daughter. Who are you? What's your name?" "Marina. Marina Shaw. I was working here at the party." "Marina," he repeated, as if committing the name to memory. "I will never forget what you did. Never." They were silent for a moment, only the crackling of the fire around them. Then Edward spoke again, his voice weaker. "It was Valentina. I saw it, she knew. She looked at me before the explosion, and I saw it in her eyes. She knew this was going to happen." Marina felt a cold chill run down her spine, despite the suffocating heat. "Are you sure?" "I am. And Richard, her assistant. They were in this together. I don't want to believe it, but I saw it. I realized it too late." Before Marina could respond, the firefighter returned with 3 more colleagues and specialized equipment. They worked quickly, using hydraulic jacks to lift the beam just enough for Edward to be pulled out. He screamed in pain during the process, but he was finally free. They placed him on a makeshift stretcher and began to carry him out. Marina followed behind, but her legs finally gave out. The adrenaline that had kept her on her feet until then vanished all at once, and she collapsed to the ground. It was one of the firefighters who caught her, carrying her in his arms as if she weighed nothing. When they got outside, the scene was one of total devastation. The mansion was completely engulfed in flames, and the firefighters were concentrating their efforts on preventing the fire from spreading to neighboring properties. It was obvious the house was lost. Nothing would remain of that symbol of wealth and ostentation. Marina was placed in an ambulance, and paramedics began to treat her injuries. She had second-degree burns on her arms, deep cuts on her hands, and a likely fractured ankle. But she barely felt the pain. Her eyes searched for Sophia and Edward. She found them in another ambulance, father and daughter reunited. Sophia was clinging to her father, crying and laughing at the same time, and Edward was hugging her with all the strength he had left, as if he wanted to merge with her so they would never be separated again. When Edward saw Marina, he waved to her, and there was so much in his gaze: gratitude, respect, a silent promise. It was then that Marina saw Valentina. The fiancé was sitting on the curb, surrounded by reporters who had quickly arrived on the scene. She was crying copiously for the cameras, her perfect face now stained with tears and smudged makeup. She talked about the trauma, about how devastated she was, about how this was an incomprehensible tragedy. But Marina watched closely, and she saw what Edward had seen. For a brief second, when Valentina thought no one was looking, when she turned her face slightly to the side, Marina saw her eyes, and they were completely dry, cold, calculating. And near her, keeping a respectful distance but always close by, was Richard. He wasn't giving interviews, just observing everything with that analytical gaze. When his eyes met Marina's, there was a flash of something, perhaps recognition that she knew too much, had seen too much. Marina felt a shiver. She had escaped death that night, but she instinctively knew the danger was not over yet. Those 2 people, Valentina and Richard, were responsible for all of this. And if they had been capable of doing something as terrible as blowing up a house full of innocent people, what else would they be capable of to protect their secret? The dawn arrived, painting the New York sky with shades of orange and pink, colors that cruelly resembled the flames still consuming the last remnants of the Miller mansion. News of the tragedy had already spread throughout the city and was beginning to gain national attention. Journalists from every media outlet arrived on the scene, setting up their cameras and microphones, eager for every detail of the story. Marina was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital along with dozens of other injured people. The entire hospital mobilized to care for the victims of the explosion. She underwent surgery on her ankle and had her wounds treated and bandaged. The doctors told her she was lucky, that it could have been much worse. Marina smiled faintly at that. Lucky. That wasn't quite the word she would use to describe her night. In the hospital room, finally alone and in silence, Marina allowed herself to process everything that had happened. The memories came in flashes, disjointed and terrifying. The chemical smell, the electronic hum, Richard's cold stare, the explosion, the fire, Sophia in her arms, Edward trapped under the rubble, and those eyes, Valentina's dry eyes amidst the fake tears. Marina knew what she had to do. She had to tell someone what she had seen, what she suspected. But who? Valentina was a celebrity with millions of followers, someone with influence and resources. Richard seemed like the type of person who knew how to cover his tracks. And Marina, who was she? A temporary employee, a woman with no resources, no connections, no voice. But she had one thing they didn't expect. She had witnessed too much, and she had saved Sophia, which at least gave her the right to be heard by Edward. The next morning, 2 police detectives appeared in Marina's room. One was a middle-aged man with greying hair and the weary expression of someone who had seen too much in his profession. The other was younger, in his 30s, with sharp eyes that missed no detail. "Ms. Marina Shaw?" the older one asked, showing his ID. "I'm Detective Paul Davies, and this is Detective Andrew Carter. We'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened at the Miller Mansion." Marina sat up in bed, ignoring the pain the movement caused. "I have a few things to tell you too." And so she told them everything. The chemical smell she had noticed hours before the explosion, the strange briefcase she had seen in the room, Richard entering and leaving the East Wing, the electronic hum, the veiled threat he had made. And finally, Valentina's cold gaze after the tragedy, so different from the tears she shed for the cameras. The 2 detectives listened in silence, taking notes. When Marina finished, they exchanged a meaningful look. "Ms. Shaw," said Detective Davies, "what you're saying is very serious. You're accusing a public figure of involvement in a crime that left 2 people critically injured and dozens of others with various injuries. Are you absolutely certain of what you saw?" "I am," Marina replied without hesitation. "I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. That was no accident. It was planned." Detective Carter leaned forward. "The forensics team has been on site since dawn. They haven't finished their analysis yet, but initial indications suggest there may have been tampering with the house's gas system. Valves that should have been open were closed, and others that should have been closed were open. Someone tampered with the system on purpose." Marina felt a mixture of validation and horror. She was right, but at the same time, knowing that people were capable of such cruelty for reasons she still didn't fully understand was devastating. "There's something else," Detective Davies said, his voice low. "We found the remains of an electronic device in the rubble, exactly in the area of the East Wing you mentioned. It appears to be a timer. We're still analyzing it, but everything indicates it was used to detonate the explosion at the precise moment." Marina closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. A timer. 12:15. The moment of the toast. The moment when everyone would be distracted, celebrating. The perfect moment for a tragedy that would look like a tragic accident. "We need you to remain available for more questions," the detective continued. "And, Miss Shaw, I need you to understand that this could get dangerous. If your suspicions are correct, and all signs point to them, being so, the people involved in this won't want the truth to come out. You need to be careful." Marina nodded. She already knew that. She had felt it in her bones that the danger hadn't passed. But at the same time, she couldn't just stay silent. Sophia had almost died. Edward had almost died. Dozens of innocent people were injured, and all because of the greed of 2 people who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. After the detectives left, Marina stared out the hospital window. Outside, New York continued its frantic routine, millions of people, coming and going, each with their own problems and worries. Life went on, indifferent to individual tragedies. But for Marina, for Edward, for Sophia, and for everyone who had been in that mansion the night before, life would never be the same. The physical scars would heal with time, but the emotional scars, those would remain forever. And somewhere in the city, Valentina was giving another interview, crying more fake tears, building her narrative of a traumatized victim. Richard remained in the shadows, calculating his next moves, trying to figure out how much Marina really knew and what it would take to silence her. The game had just begun, and Marina, whether she wanted to or not, was right in the middle of it. 3 days had passed since the tragedy. The story dominated every news broadcast in the country. The explosion at the Upper East Side mansion had become the most talked-about topic on social media, television shows, and in print newspapers. Images of the fire were shown repeatedly, interspersed with before and after photos, showing the opulence that had existed and the ruins that remained. Marina was discharged from the hospital on Thursday morning. Her ankle was in a cast, and she would need crutches for a few weeks, but the doctors assured her she would make a full recovery. Physically, at least. Emotionally, Marina knew she would carry that night with her forever. An official police car was waiting at the hospital entrance to pick her up. Detective Paul Davies had insisted on providing secure transportation, and Marina had accepted without hesitation. She had nowhere to go. Her small rented apartment in Queens seemed distant and unsafe now, but to her surprise, the car didn't take her home. "Mr. Edward Miller requested that you be brought to him," explained the driver, a young uniformed officer. "He's temporarily staying at a hotel near Fifth Avenue. He wanted to thank you personally." Marina felt a mix of relief and apprehension. She wanted to see how Edward and Sophia were, but she also feared the emotional intensity of that meeting. Still, she nodded silently and let herself be driven. The hotel was discreet but high-end, the kind of place that didn't attract attention from the outside, but offered all the necessary comfort and security. Marina was escorted to a suite on the 10th floor. When the door opened, Sophia was the first to appear. "Auntie Marina." The girl ran and threw herself into her arms, nearly knocking over the crutches. Marina laughed, a genuine laugh she hadn't had in days, and hugged the child tightly. Edward appeared right behind her. He was in a wheelchair, his left leg in a cast and his face still marked by a few bruises, but his eyes were alive, conscious, grateful. He extended his hand to Marina, and when she took it, he pulled her closer and hugged her too. "There are no words to thank you for what you did," Edward said, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved my daughter. You saved me. You risked your own life without a second thought." Marina felt tears well up in her eyes. "I did what any decent person would have done." "No," Edward shook his head. "Most people would have run. You went back, you went into the fire. That's not what just anyone would do, that's heroism." They talked for hours. Edward told her how he was feeling, how Sophia was coping with the trauma, how the doctors said they would both make a full recovery. But then he grew serious and Marina knew they were about to broach the subject neither of them wanted to discuss, but which was inevitable. "The police came to see me yesterday," Edward began. "They showed me the preliminary evidence. The gas system was tampered with. The house's security cameras were deliberately turned off an hour before the explosion, and they found that device, the timer." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Marina, you were right. That was no accident. It was attempted murder. Against me." Marina nodded. She already knew, but hearing Edward confirm it made it all the more real, all the more heavy. "And there's more," Edward continued, his voice hardening. "My lawyer was reviewing some financial documents. We discovered that Valentina had access to several of my accounts. I gave her power of attorney 2 months ago, when our relationship seemed solid. I thought it was the right thing to do since we were getting married, but she used that power of attorney to make transfers, sign documents, change beneficiaries on insurance policies." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly distressed. "If I had died in that explosion, Valentina would have inherited practically everything. My fortune, my companies, everything. Sophia would have been left in a guardianship that conveniently was also in Valentina's hands." Marina felt a wave of anger wash over her. "She planned to kill you for the money. And Sophia, what would have happened to Sophia?" Edward closed his eyes, and Marina saw a tear run down his face. "I don't know, I don't even want to think about it. But what I do know is that this woman deceived me, deceived everyone, and almost got away with a heinous crime." "Do the police know all of this?" I've already handed all the documents over to Detective Davies. They're building the case. But Valentina is smart, Marina. She has millions of followers, resources, very expensive lawyers. And Richard, that man, we found out he has a criminal record. He was investigated years ago for fraud, but was never convicted due to lack of evidence. They know how to operate in the shadows. At that moment, Edward's cell phone rang. He looked at the screen and his face hardened even more. "It's the detective." "Excuse me." Edward answered and put it on speakerphone so Marina could hear as well. Detective Davies' voice sounded serious, but there was a note of satisfaction in it. "Mr. Miller, we have an update. We've analyzed the security camera footage from the streets surrounding your property. One of them, from a neighboring house, captured images of Richard Taylor entering and leaving your mansion twice in the hours leading up to the party. He was carrying a metal briefcase, the same one Ms. Shaw described." Marina and Edward exchanged an intense look. "There's more," the detective continued. "We managed to track phone calls between Richard and Valentina throughout the week before the party. There were more than 20 calls a day, many of them at suspicious times, in the middle of the night, early in the morning, and we discovered that the two of them knew each other for much longer than they publicly claimed. We found photos of them together, dating back 8 months, long before Valentina met you, Mr. Miller." Edward clenched his fist tightly. "So it was all planned from the beginning. She approached me on purpose." "It seems so. We're deepening the investigation, but I need to warn you, and Ms. Shaw as well. You both need to increase your security. People capable of what they did are dangerous and unpredictable. I've already requested that the police maintain discreet surveillance on you." After the call ended, the silence in the suite was heavy. Sophia, sensing the tension, approached her father and held his hand. Edward pulled her into a tight hug, as if to protect her from all the evil in the world. "Marina," Edward said after a moment, "I want to hire you, not as an employee, but as part of my personal security team. I want you close to Sophia. You're the only person, besides me, that I completely trust with my daughter's life." Marina was taken aback. "Mr. Miller, I don't have any training for that. I'm just a domestic worker. You are much more than that. You've proven your courage, your loyalty, your protective instinct, and Sophia trusts you. She feels safe with you. That's worth more than any training." He paused. "Please, Marina, accept. At least until all of this is resolved." Marina looked at Sophia, who was staring at her with those big, hopeful eyes. How could she refuse? "All right, I accept." The following days were a roller coaster of emotions and revelations. The police investigation was moving quickly, but so was Valentina's propaganda machine. She continued to give interviews crying for the cameras, talking about how devastated she was by the tragedy, how she was praying for Edward and Sophia's recovery. Her social media following grew even larger, and she earned the nickname the Wounded Fiancée in the tabloids. But in the shadows, the investigators were piecing things together. Detective Andrew Carter, the young officer with the sharp eyes, was the one who made the most important discovery. He found, in a deeper analysis of the rubble, a watch. Richard's silver watch. It was stopped at exactly 12:15, the moment of the explosion. But it wasn't just an ordinary watch. When the forensics team examined it, they discovered it had been modified. There was a small electronic device embedded inside, a receiver that could have been used as a remote detonator or as part of the timer's activation system. Furthermore, analysis of bank records revealed suspicious transfers. Valentina had deposited significant sums into Richard's account in the preceding months. The transactions were made through shell companies, but the forensic accountants managed to trace them. The net was closing in. Marina, meanwhile, remained at the hotel with Edward and Sophia. She helped care for the girl, who was having constant nightmares about the fire. Sometimes Sophia would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, and it was Marina who would rush to calm her down, holding her, softly singing songs she didn't know where they came from, perhaps memories from when she was a mother. Yes, Marina had been a mother. 5 years ago she had a 4-year-old daughter named Letitia. And on a terrible night, much like the one at the Miller mansion, a fire had started in their apartment building. Marina was at work when she got the call. She rushed home, but she was too late. The building was in flames, and the firefighters stopped her from going inside. Letitia did not survive. Neither did her husband, Robert, who had tried to save her. Marina spent years blaming herself, sinking into depression, losing herself. It was only recently that she had begun to rebuild, taking temporary jobs, trying not to get attached to anyone, not allowing herself to feel too much. But now, caring for Sophia, something inside her was awakening again. A part of her, she thought, had died along with Letitia. One afternoon, while Sophia was drawing in the suite's living room, Edward called Marina to talk privately in the bedroom. "I found something," he said, showing her some documents on his laptop. "I hired a private investigator, a trustworthy one this time, to look into Valentina and Richard's past, and what we found is disturbing." Marina leaned in to look at the screen. There were photos, documents, records. Richard Taylor is not his real name. His name is Richard Silverstone, and he's been involved in 3 other similar cases. Always the same pattern. He gets close to ambitious women, plans scams against wealthy men, and then disappears when things get complicated. They've never been able to prove anything against him, but the cases are there, documented. Marina felt a shiver. And Valentina. Has she done this before? Not in the same way. But we discovered she has massive debts. She maintains an appearance of wealth on social media, but in reality she's broke. The designer clothes, the jewelry, it's all rented or loaned by brands in exchange for publicity. She was desperate for real money. Edward took a deep breath. And I was the perfect target. A widower, emotionally vulnerable, with a considerable fortune, and a young daughter who could be easily manipulated or, God forbid, eliminated after my death. "They won't get away with it," Marina said with conviction. "There's too much evidence." "I hope you're right. But people like that, Marina, they always have a plan B. They always have a way out." As if the universe were confirming Edward's words, the afternoon news brought a shocking development. Valentina had given an exclusive interview to one of the country's biggest television shows. And in that interview, she completely changed her narrative. Marina and Edward watched in horror as Valentina, with tears in her eyes, told a completely different story. She claimed she had been manipulated by Richard, that he had threatened her, that she was afraid of him but didn't know how to escape. She said she had only discovered his plans on the night of the party, but it was too late to do anything. It was a brilliant and desperate move. Valentina was throwing Richard under the bus, trying to paint herself as another victim. And the worst part was that her performance was convincing. She cried at the right moments. Her voice trembled with emotion. Her eyes pleaded for understanding. "She's lying," Marina said through gritted teeth. "She was just as involved as he was. I saw their look, the complicity." "I know," Edward replied, "but she has millions of people believing her, and without concrete proof that she was actively involved, just testimonies and circumstantial evidence, she might get away with it." It was then that Marina made a decision. "I have to go back there." "Go back where?" "To the ruins of the mansion. There's something that won't leave my mind. That room where I saw the briefcase. I need to search more thoroughly. There might be something the police didn't find." "Marina, that's dangerous. The site is cordoned off, and besides, if Valentina or Richard suspect you're investigating on your own, they already know I know too much. I'm already in danger anyway. But if I can find something, anything that definitively proves her involvement, it's worth the risk." Edward hesitated, but then he nodded. "I'll go with you. You're in a wheelchair. Then you'll be my eyes, and I'll be your conscience. I'm not letting you go alone." They planned for the following night. Detective Davies was informed, and he reluctantly agreed to accompany them, bringing Detective Carter as well. The official forensic search had already finished collecting the main evidence, but a more detailed search might reveal something that had been overlooked. The night was dark when they arrived at the plot where the Miller mansion once stood. The ruins looked even more sinister under the moonlight, distorted shadows casting themselves over the rubble. The smell of burning still permeated the air, mixed with the smell of wet earth, as it had rained that afternoon. Marina felt a tightness in her chest upon seeing the place again. Memories of the night of the explosion flooded her mind. The heat, the smoke, the screams. But she took a deep breath and forced herself to continue. With the help of powerful flashlights, they began to search. Marina guided the group to what was left of the east wing. Much of the structure had collapsed, but it was still possible to identify where the rooms had been. "It was here," Marina indicated. "The briefcase was on the table right there." They carefully sifted through the wreckage. Carter used a metal detector, searching for anything that might have survived the fire. After nearly an hour of searching, it was Marina who found it, partially buried. Under ash and pieces of charred wood was a small notebook. The cover was burned, but the inside, protected by the thick cover, was relatively intact. Marina picked it up carefully, using gloves Carter had offered her, and began to flip through it. It was a notebook of annotations, and the annotations were Richard's. There were dates, times, detailed descriptions of the house layout, access points to the gas system, schematics on how to disable the security cameras, and most importantly, there were transcribed conversations between him and Valentina. In one of them, dated 2 weeks before the party, Valentina wrote, according to Richard's notes, "It needs to look like an accident, there can't be any suspicion, and when he's gone, I'll take care of the child. She can't inherit anything." Marina felt nauseous reading those words. Take care of the child. They had planned to eliminate Sophia too, an innocent 7-year-old child. "We found it," Marina said, her voice trembling with anger and emotion. "Here is the proof. Valentina was fully involved. She planned everything." Detective Davies took the notebook carefully, examining it in the light of his flashlight. His face grew more and more serious as he read, "This changes everything. With this notebook, plus the other evidence we already have, we can not only charge Richard, but also Valentina. This is proof of conspiracy, premeditation, and attempted aggravated murder." Carter was already on the phone calling for backup, alerting prosecutors. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn for real now. Edward, who had remained in his wheelchair near the entrance to the property, was silent. When Marina approached him, she saw tears in his eyes. "She was going to hurt Sophia," he said softly. "Not just me. She was going to hurt my daughter." Marina knelt beside him holding his hand. "But she didn't, and she won't, because we're going to stop them. The truth is coming out, Edward. Justice will be served." But as they said those words, as Detective Davies coordinated the operation over the phone, none of them noticed the figure in the shadows, watching everything from a distance. A figure with a silver watch on his wrist, even though the original was in police custody. Richard always had backup plans. Always. News of the notebook's discovery spread quickly through the official investigation channels. Detective Paul Davies called an emergency meeting at the precinct the next morning, gathering prosecutors, forensic experts, and his team of investigators. The small notebook, now protected in an evidence bag, lay on the table like a silent but devastating testament to human evil. Marina was called to testify again, this time with every detail being formally recorded. Edward also gave his statement, reporting the financial manipulations, the fraudulent powers of attorney, and his own emotional blindness that had nearly cost him his life, and that of his daughter. Meanwhile, Valentina continued her campaign of victimhood on social media. She posted old photos with Edward and Sophia, with emotional captions about lost love and trauma, and tearful videos about how much she was suffering. Her followers were divided between those who firmly believed in her innocence and those who were beginning to question the narrative she presented. Richard, on the other hand, had vanished. After Valentina's interview throwing him under the bus, he simply disappeared. He wasn't at his apartment, wasn't answering his phone, and his car was found abandoned in a parking lot at JFK Airport. The police issued an arrest warrant and put his name on the wanted list, but as of that moment, he remained at large. "He's going to try to leave the country," said Detective Carter during the meeting at the precinct. "We've already alerted the FBI and Interpol. All ports and airports are on high alert." "And Valentina?" asked Edward, who had insisted on attending the meeting. "With the evidence from the notebook, can we arrest her?" The district attorney, a middle-aged man named Dr. Frederick Gunn, nodded gravely. "Yes. The contents of the notebook, combined with the financial evidence, the call logs and the testimonies, Give us sufficient grounds for a pre-trial detention warrant. She will be charged with attempted aggravated murder, criminal conspiracy and fraud. We are preparing the operation for this afternoon." Marina felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Finally, justice would be served. But something still bothered her, a feeling that the danger had not completely passed. The operation was planned for 4 o'clock that afternoon. Valentina was staying at a luxury hotel in Midtown, where she continued to give interviews and receive messages of support from her followers. The police would discreetly surround the location to avoid a commotion and then execute the arrest warrant. Edward returned to the hotel where he was staying with Sophia and Marina. The girl seemed calmer in recent days, but she still had moments of anxiety, especially when she heard sirens or any loud noises. Marina always stayed close to her, a constant and comforting presence. "Auntie Marina," Sophia said as she drew at the living room table, "when all this is over, are you going to leave?" Marina looked at the girl, surprised by the question. "Why are you asking that, sweetie?" "Because people always leave. My mommy left, and I'm afraid you'll leave too." Marina's heart ached. She knelt beside Sophia, gently holding her small hand. "Sophia, I'm not going anywhere. I promise I'll stay as long as you need me. And even after that, I'll always be close by, okay?" Sophia threw her arms around Marina's neck, hugging her tightly. "I love you, Auntie Marina." Marina felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too, Sophia, very much." Edward watched the scene from the bedroom doorway, and when Marina looked at him, she saw tears in his eyes too. Something was changing between them, a connection that went beyond gratitude, a mutual understanding of loss and rebuilding. At 3:45, Edward's phone rang. It was Detective Davies. "We're in position. We're executing the warrant in 15 minutes. I thought you'd want to know." Edward thanked him and hung up. He turned on the television in the living room, knowing the news would soon be covering the arrest. Marina sat beside him, and the two waited in tense silence. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Exactly at 4 o'clock, the images began to appear on the screen. News cameras showed the police activity in front of the hotel where Valentina was staying. Patrol cars with flashing lights, uniformed officers cordoning off the area, reporters trying to get closer to capture every detail. And then, the cameras captured the moment. Valentina being escorted out of the hotel by police officers. She wasn't crying this time. Her face was pale, hard, and for the first time, the mask had completely fallen away. This was no longer the charismatic and emotional influencer. This was a woman who knew her world was crumbling. She tried to cover her face with her hands when she saw the cameras, but it was futile. Flashes went off from all sides. Reporters shouted questions she didn't answer. She was put into a patrol car, and the car sped off toward the precinct, followed by a caravan of media vehicles. Edward turned off the television. He was silent for a long moment and then said softly, "It's over. It's finally over." But Marina still felt that unease. "Richard is still at large. Until he's captured, we can't let our guard down." As if her words were prophetic, Marina's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello, Marina Shaw." The voice on the other end was cold, controlled. "Richard, you've gotten yourself into something you shouldn't have." Marina felt her blood run cold. She made a frantic signal to Edward, who immediately grabbed his own phone to call the police. "What do you want, Richard?" Marina tried to keep her voice steady, to buy time. "Justice has a price, Marina. Valentina is in jail because of you. All that evidence you found, that damn notebook, you destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything. You two did. When you decided to try to kill innocent people for money." Richard laughed, a humorless sound. "Innocent? Edward Miller is a businessman who made his fortune exploiting workers, building skyscrapers while families lost their homes to real estate speculation. There's no innocence when it comes to money, Marina, only predators and prey." "And Sophia, a 7-year-old child, was she not innocent either?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. When Richard spoke again, his voice had a different note, perhaps regret, perhaps just weariness. The girl should never have been involved. That was Valentina's idea, not mine. Lies. I read the notebook, Richard. I saw your notes. You were just as involved as she was. You don't understand. Valentina is manipulative, seductive. She convinced me it would be simple, clean, no victims. But then everything spun out of control. Marina could hear Edward in the background, talking quickly with Detective Davies, who was already tracing the call. Richard, turn yourself in. You'll only make your situation worse by running. No, Marina, but I will give you a gift, a warning. Valentina won't stay in prison for long. She has resources, contacts, lawyers who can work miracles. And when she gets out, she'll want revenge. Against you, against Edward, and especially against the key witness who put her in jail. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to save you, because even with everything I've done, I don't want anyone else's death on my conscience, especially not someone who was just trying to do the right thing. He paused. Take good care of that girl, Marina. She needs you. And then the line went dead. Marina stared at the phone, processing what she had just heard. Edward came over, placing a hand on her shoulder. The police traced the call. He was at the Port Authority bus terminal. They're on their way there now. Less than an hour later, the news came. Richard had been captured. He offered no resistance when the officers surrounded him. It was as if he was tired of running, ready to face the consequences of his actions. With Richard and Valentina in custody, the legal process began to unfold. The hearings were followed by the entire country, broadcast live, commented on in television shows and on social media. Richard's notebook became the centerpiece of the prosecution, its pages projected onto screens for all to see the coldness with which a heinous crime had been planned. Valentina tried to maintain her narrative of a manipulated victim, but her defense crumbled when confronted with the evidence. The prosecutors presented records of messages between her and Richard, conversations in which she not only agreed with the plan, but encouraged it. They presented the financial documents showing how she had systematically misappropriated Edward's resources. And they presented Marina's testimony, clear, detailed, unwavering. Richard, on the other hand, confessed to everything, perhaps seeking a reduced sentence, perhaps simply tired of lying. He recounted every detail of the plan. How he had met Valentina at an event 8 months earlier, how she had approached him with the idea of scamming Edward, how he had provided the technical expertise to carry out the explosion. He described how they manipulated the gas system, planted the timer, and calculated the exact moment to maximize the impact. His testimony was disturbing, but essential for the conviction. 3 months after the tragedy, the verdict was announced. Valentina Monroe and Richard Silverstone were found guilty of attempted aggravated murder, criminal conspiracy, fraud, and other related crimes. Valentina was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Richard, for having confessed and cooperated with the investigation, received 20 years. When the sentence was read, Marina was present in the courtroom, sitting next to Edward. She saw Valentina receive the news with an impassive face, but she could perceive the exact moment when reality hit her. The influencer who had millions of followers, who lived off appearances and likes, would now spend the next few decades behind bars. Justice had been served. But for Marina, the real transformation was just beginning. In the weeks that followed the trial, Edward made a proposal to Marina. He wanted to create a foundation dedicated to helping victims of tragedies and crimes, offering psychological, legal, and financial support. And he wanted Marina to be the director of this foundation. "You know the pain these people feel," Edward said. "You went through it when you lost your family. And you know what it means to rise again, to find strength when all seems lost. These people need someone who understands, who has genuine empathy. And that person is you." Marina was silent for a long moment, thinking of Letitia, of Robert, of everything she had lost and everything she had found. "I accept," she said finally. "But on one condition. The foundation will also work on prevention, education about safety, about how to recognize signs of danger, about trusting your instincts. If I had acted faster that night, if I had shouted louder about what I was feeling, maybe we could have avoided the tragedy altogether. Then we'll do it together, Edward extended his hand. We'll transform this pain into something positive, something that can help other people. Marina shook his hand, and for the first time in years she felt real hope for the future. The Renewed Hope Foundation was inaugurated 6 months after the trial in a renovated building in downtown Manhattan. The opening ceremony was attended by officials, victims of various crimes and tragedies, and a lot of press. But the most emotional moment was when Sophia, now 8 years old, cut the ribbon for the inauguration alongside Marina. The girl had recovered wonderfully from the trauma. With the help of therapy and the constant love of Marina and Edward, she had started to smile again, to play, to be a child. Of course, she still had her difficult moments, still occasionally woke up with nightmares, but she was learning to process what had happened and to move on. Edward had also been transformed. The tragedy had made him reevaluate his priorities. He reduced his work hours to spend more time with Sophia. He began to use his fortune and influence for social causes, not only through the foundation but also by reforming his business practices to be more fair and ethical. And Marina, she had blossomed in ways she never imagined possible. The work at the foundation gave her purpose, allowing her to channel her pain into genuine help for others. She coordinated a team of psychologists, lawyers, and social workers, all dedicated to making a difference in the lives of people who had gone through traumatic situations. But more than the work, it was Sophia who had truly saved Marina. Caring for that girl, watching her grow and recover, had filled a void that Marina thought would remain open forever. Sophia didn't replace Letitia, nothing could, but she had created a new space for love in Marina's heart. A year after the foundation's inauguration, on a warm July afternoon, Marina and Edward were in the garden of the new house he had bought, smaller and cozier than the lost mansion, but much happier. Sophia was playing with a dog they had recently adopted, and her laughter echoed through the air. "You know," Edward said, watching his daughter, "I spent years trying to keep up appearances, building an empire, accumulating wealth. I thought that was success, but I almost lost everything that truly mattered because of that blindness." "You didn't lose it," Marina replied softly. "Sophia is here, you are here, and you have a whole life ahead of you." Edward turned to look at Marina. "We do, the three of us." Marina smiled. In recent months, something had changed between her and Edward. What had started as gratitude and mutual respect had transformed into something deeper. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was something more real, built on shared scars and renewed hopes. "Auntie Marina!" Sophia ran toward them, the dog hopping behind her. "Can I go to the park tomorrow with my school friends?" "Of course you can, sweetie," Marina replied, affectionately ruffling the girl's hair. "And will you come with me? Please." "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Sophia hugged Marina tightly and then ran back to play. Edward took Marina's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything, for saving Sophia, for saving me, for giving us a second chance." "We saved each other," Marina replied. "Sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be, even if the path to get there is painful." As the sun set over New York, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Marina thought about how drastically her life had changed in a year. She had lost so much, suffered so much, but she had also found a new purpose, a new family, a new reason to wake up each morning. The fire that had once destroyed her had ultimately led her to save another life, and in doing so, she had saved herself as well. The ashes of the past had given rise to something new, something beautiful, something full of hope. On the plot where the Miller mansion once stood, a garden now grew. Edward had decided not to rebuild the house, but to transform that space into a memorial for everyone who survived that night, and a reminder that even from the greatest tragedy, renewal can be born. Marina visited that place occasionally, sitting on the stone bench installed under a flowering tree. It was there that she silently talked to Letitia, telling her about Sophia, about how she was trying to honor her memory by doing good in the world. And it was there, On that ground that once burned in flames, that Marina finally managed to forgive herself for not arriving in time to save her own daughter, to forgive herself for having survived when Letitia did not, to forgive herself and allow herself to live again, to love again, to be happy again. Because life, Marina had learned, does not end with tragedy. Life goes on. And sometimes, if we are brave enough to move forward, we can find beauty again, even among the ashes. Sophia would grow up, go to school, make new friends, have adventures. Edward would continue to build, but now building bridges instead of just buildings, building hope instead of just wealth. And Marina would continue to care, to protect, to love, honoring those she lost by helping those who were still here. The night that began with crystals and ambitions ended in ashes and truth. But from those ashes, like a phoenix, a new story was born, a story of courage, of redemption, of second chances, a story that proved that even when all seems lost, even when the fire consumes everything around, hope can survive. And as Marina watched Sophia play in the garden, the girls' laughter echoing through the afternoon air, she knew it had all been worth it. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night had all led to this moment, to this new beginning. The fire that once destroyed her had, in the end, lit her way back home, to a new family, to a new life. And finally, after so long in the dark, Marina could see the light. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marina, Edward, and Sophia has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, courage, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the most human and resilient side of the soul, showing that even from the greatest tragedies, the most beautiful transformations can be born. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. See you soon.